We always say that people get into this work because it's what they needed or for some reason, and for me it was because it's what I needed when I was younger. I went to a predominantly white middle school, and I actually was embarrassed of my dad's accent. And my dad is the most incredible man on this planet. And I feel so much shame as an adult at the fact that I was so embarrassed of these things that made me who I am, that made me Latina and that made me Mexican. And it's just because there wasn't spaces where my identity was normalized. And so I needed a space like ourBRIDGE growing up, where I could feel safe and seen and loved and heard. And when I went to high school, I went to a predominantly black high school, and I had teachers who were, teaching me about James Baldwin and Richard Wright, and I was reading about struggles. I read Bryan Stevenson, and I was liberated with those authors, and I felt connected to who I was, and I was able to, recognize that I was conditioned to hate my identity. And I was conditioned to turn away from who I was and to turn away from my family, and being able to turn back to that and being able to recognize the power in my family's story and history and my identities and my experiences was incredibly liberating. I grew up with a mixed status family, and I personally have the privilege of having citizenship, and I knew that I needed to get involved. I knew that things that were happening were not fair. I grew up with the fear of my family being split apart. I saw family members be split apart. So I got involved in activism, specifically immigrant rights activism, when I was 17 years old, and one of my classmates was detained by ICE. I got involved in advocating for his release, and it was actually the NC6 campaign. There were 6 students across North Carolina who were picked up who just came here to go to school. And my whole thing was that kids shouldn't be deported. They should have a right to education, not deportation. Unfortunately, he was deported, but I knew that this was something that I needed to get involved in, and it felt unfair, it felt not right, and I needed to do something. And so I got involved in that field. I worked at the Latin American Coalition for a while, and then I found myself working with kids, and I worked at Freedom Schools, and we had a site that was predominantly Latinos. And there was one day when we usually had about 90% attendance rate. There was one day where that dropped exponentially, and we were very concerned. I was calling parents, and there was an ICE raid in the neighborhood that day, so a lot of parents didn't send their kids to the program. And I remember that fear from growing up of you can't leave your house, of being afraid that they're gonna catch your parents as if they're some bad guys or criminals. And I just remember what it was like, and I wanted to find a program or something that was doing things for kids that I needed when I was younger. Then I found ourBRIDGE, and my two loves of education and kids and immigrant rights just kind of combined. It just made sense to come here and start doing the work and meet these incredible kids and the families. And my hope is that kids can see themselves in their teachers, that there are more black and brown teachers filling up spaces in our schools, that schools are taking the initiative to not only just have International Day fairs, but also acknowledging, all of the racist structures within our schools and practices and policies, and implementing changes so that schools can be a little bit more safer for our immigrant and refugee children and for all of our children. We know that if something benefits immigrant and refugee children, it actually benefits all children, right? Studies show that more diversity makes school better for all kids. And so my hope is that schools will become safer for all kids in spaces where they can feel seen, heard, loved, and celebrated.